The dust rose in lazy spirals behind the old Chevrolet truck as it rumbled to a stop at the edge of a weathered farmhouse. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden light across the fields, but to Margaret, it didn't feel like a welcome. It felt like a spotlight. 24-year-old Margaret sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands trembling as they clutched the handle of a scuffed leather suitcase that held everything she owned. Her long blonde hair was braided simply the way her mother liked, and her faded floral dress, carefully mended in more places than she could count, whispered of too many years spent being good enough. She'd always been bigger than the other girls in town, and her family had made sure she never forgot it. Even now, her father's voice still echoed in her head from that morning. Sharp. Final cold. Margaret, this arrangement will solve our problems. Thomas Brennan needs a wife to help with his farm, and frankly, we can't afford to be choosy about suitors. The words hadn't been meant to comfort her. They were meant to remind her of what she was, a burden. A daughter who ate too much, spoke too softly, and contributed too little. When the bank threatened to foreclose on their little general store, her father hadn't hesitated. He'd practically leapt at Thomas Brennan's proposal. Her mother's words had been even sharper. He's just a poor dirt farmer, but he'll pay off our debts for your hand. Consider it your contribution to the family after all these years of taking. Now, as the truck door creaked open, Margaret stepped down onto the packed earth, her heart hammering. The farmhouse loomed ahead, plain, sturdy, unfamiliar. She gripped the handle of her suitcase tighter. She didn't feel like a bride. She felt like cargo being delivered. Her father didn't meet her eyes as he hauled her small stack of belongings onto the porch. Thomas should be around somewhere, he muttered, brushing off his hands like the deal was already done. Remember, Margaret, you're his responsibility now. Don't embarrass our name. The words stung, but she stayed silent. She always did. Then from behind the house, two figures appeared, as if the ground itself had answered her dread. The first was a man in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, sun-tanned, with brown hair and eyes that, to her surprise, seemed gentle. He wore a blue plaid shirt and jeans, the kind worn thin by honest work. His movements were steady, confident, like someone who'd spent his whole life on solid ground. Beside him walked an older man, gray beard full and neat, wearing overalls and a soft cotton shirt. His expression was warm, almost kind, and as they approached, Margaret's heart thudded louder. This was it. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the moment her life changed, whether she liked it or not. Thomas removed his hat as he approached, his steps slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that didn't demand, but offered. "Miss Margaret," he said softly, the brim of his hat resting against his chest. "I'm Thomas Brennan, and this here is my father, Samuel Brennan. Welcome to our home." Something in the way he said it, our home, made the words linger in the warm air between them. Margaret had braced herself for a hard, judgmental stare, the kind she had received from nearly every man in town. But Thomas didn't look at her like that. There was no disgust, no pity, only quiet kindness. "I know this situation isn't what you might have chosen for yourself," Thomas continued carefully, his voice steady. "But I want you to know this. You'll be treated with respect here, and with kindness. This is your home now, for as long as you choose to stay." Margaret's throat tightened. She had expected to feel invisible, unwanted, a transaction, not a person. But in that moment, Thomas's words felt disarmingly human. Behind her, her father shook Thomas's hand briskly, almost as if afraid the deal might vanish if he lingered too long. A few brief words, a muttered "thank you," and just like that, the truck was rattling away down the dusty road. Margaret watched it disappear until it was nothing more than a cloud of brown against the horizon. She was alone now, alone with a man she barely knew, alone with a future she hadn't chosen. "Come," Thomas said gently, breaking the silence. "Let me show you the house. You must be tired. And hungry, too, I imagine." They walked up the wooden steps to the porch, and as Margaret crossed the threshold, she was caught off guard. She had expected a dark, cramped house, a place that smelled of dust and loneliness. Instead, she found a home that felt alive. The land stretched farther than she'd imagined, rolling fields framed by well-kept fences. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and the evening breeze carried the scent of hay and warm earth. Inside, the house was simple but spotless. The kitchen was the heart of it, bright and welcoming, with a massive wood-burning stove and a sturdy oak table large enough to seat a whole family. Every surface gleamed from care, not wealth. "I know it's not fancy," Thomas said, almost apologetic, as he set her suitcase down by the stairs. "But we've tried to make it comfortable. Your room's just up there, first door on the right. You'll have your own space and the doors have locks. You'll have your privacy." Margaret blinked at him, startled. She'd been preparing herself to be treated like property, like help. She hadn't expected consideration. That was when Samuel Brennan finally spoke. His voice warm and steady, like a grandfather telling a bedtime story. "Margaret, my dear," he said, stepping forward with a gentle smile, "Thomas is a good man. He'll never do anything to make you uncomfortable or afraid. We both hope that, in time, this place might truly feel like your home too." His words wrapped around her like a soft blanket she hadn't known she needed. As the evening light softened over the fields, Margaret realized this wasn't the beginning she'd imagined. It wasn't the end of her story either. It was something unknown, and in that uncertainty, for the first time in a long time, there was the faintest flicker of hope. Margaret sat at the heavy oak kitchen table, a plate of steaming pot roast and vegetables before her. The aroma was simple, comforting, the kind of food that reminded her of childhood, though never of warmth or love. As she took her first bite, she realized something strange. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an intruder. Thomas and his father moved around her with an ease that was almost mesmerizing. They asked questions about books she liked, about the small hobbies she had clung to, and, astonishingly, they listened. Really listened. Their attention made her feel seen, for perhaps the first time in her life. When she mentioned her love of reading, Thomas's eyes brightened. A spark of genuine excitement. "We have a fair collection of books in the parlor," he said eagerly. "Please take whatever interests you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them." She blinked, a little overwhelmed. Respect, kindness, no judgment. It was almost too much to believe. The following weeks passed in a rhythm that was unfamiliar yet comforting. Thomas rose before dawn every day, his hands calloused and sure as he tended the land and animals. But despite the demands of farm life, he never imposed upon her. Margaret found herself wandering the wide pastures, exploring the barns, or curling up with a book in the parlor. Every detail of the farm seemed to unfold naturally around her, and slowly she began to see that life at the Brennan farm was nothing like she had expected. It wasn't merely a modest homestead. It was a thriving agricultural enterprise. Thomas managed thousands of acres of fertile land, several hundred head of cattle, and held profitable contracts stretching across 3 states. Margaret's assumptions, that she'd been traded into a meager life of toil, were shattered with every careful, thoughtful gesture Thomas extended. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in strokes of amber and rose, Margaret found herself seated next to him on the front porch. Silence hung between them for a moment, broken only by the low hum of the evening breeze. Finally she asked softly, "Why didn't you ever correct my father's assumptions about your financial situation?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting in his lap, steady but heavy with thought. Your father, he was looking for a solution to his problems, not for a man who would cherish his daughter, he said finally. I thought if he knew the truth, he might have different motivations for this arrangement. And, well, Margaret, what were your motivations? Margaret's chest tightened. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. I suppose I didn't want to be a burden any longer? Thomas met her gaze, those honest brown eyes holding hers without judgment. Loneliness, he admitted quietly. If I am completely honest, this farm, it's successful, yes, but it's also been empty. When I heard about your situation, I thought, perhaps we might be able to help each other. Her heart fluttered at his words, a mix of relief, surprise, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope. As autumn slowly surrendered to winter, the days grew shorter and colder, yet Margaret felt a warmth she hadn't expected. Between the steady rhythm of farm life, Thomas's gentle care, and the quiet beauty of the land, a new chapter was beginning. One that was no longer dictated by fear, judgment, or debt, but by trust, respect, and the faintest glimmer of something far more powerful, belonging. Margaret had settled into the rhythm of farm life in a way she never thought possible. Days began early, filled with the crisp air of the fields and the steady cadence of chores, but she found herself thriving. She discovered a knack for managing the household finances, meticulously tracking accounts and correspondence, and even began assisting Thomas with his business letters. Her sharp mind and careful attention impressed both men, but more importantly, she finally felt what she had always longed for, to be valued. Thomas regularly sought her advice on critical decisions, trusting her judgment as if it were his own. Samuel treated her like the daughter he had never had, filling a void Margaret had carried silently for 24 years. The change wasn't only emotional. It showed in her posture, in the way she carried herself with newfound confidence, and in the spark that finally lit her eyes. She still carried her familiar curves, but now they seemed a testament to her strength, not a reason for shame. One snowy December evening, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered against the farmhouse windows, Margaret and Thomas sat side by side, books in hand. But Thomas set his aside, his expression unusually serious. Margaret, I need to say something, he began, voice low but steady, and I hope you won't take offense. Margaret felt a twinge of panic. Had she done something wrong? When this arrangement began, I thought perhaps we might develop a partnership of convenience, Thomas continued, carefully choosing each word. But somewhere along the way, my feelings have changed completely. I have come to love you, not as a helper, not as a partner in business, but as the woman I want to spend my life with. You bring joy, intelligence, and warmth to everything you touch. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, blurring the dancing flames of the hearth. You don't need to answer now, he added gently. I just wanted you to know. If you ever choose to make this marriage real in every sense, it would make me the happiest man alive. Margaret looked at him, this kind, strong, genuine man, and felt a warmth in her chest she had never known. The man who had shown her more respect, care, and love in 6 months than her family had in 24 years. I love you too, she whispered, voice trembling. You've given me something I never thought I would have. A place where I am valued for who I am, not judged for what I am not. The following spring, they celebrated their love with a second wedding, not out of obligation, but from a place of joy and devotion. Margaret had blossomed into a radiant, confident woman, managing both the household and significant aspects of the farm business with skill and grace. When her family, having learned of Thomas's true wealth and standing, attempted to reconnect, Margaret politely but firmly declined. She had learned that true family is not measured by blood or duty, but by love, respect, and care. Years later, Margaret watched their children play in the same farmyard where she had once stood with a suitcase and a heart heavy with despair. She reflected on the twists of life, how hardship had unexpectedly led her to a home, a love, and a life she never could have imagined. Thomas had given her more than security or status. He had given her the gift of seeing herself through eyes that loved and valued her. Her worth had never been determined by appearance, weight, or the narrow judgments of others. She had found her home not just in the vast rolling acres of the Brennan farm, but in the heart of a man who loved her exactly as she was. And in that love, she had finally found herself.